Thank you very much for that testimony. You mentioned the word collaboration a lot with the state as well as the local governments. I'm glad that your placement agency is doing so. I think the proper word is coordination.
Yes.
Coordination. When you get, do you have placements in Amarillo?
No, we're Catholic Charities Diocese of Fort Worth, so we serve a 28-county region. You got it. And now we do have a sister agency in Amarillo. I know Amarillo's had their struggles. They've dropped the numbers they're taking a year from 400 to 160 refugees.
Tell me how you coordinate with the local governments, and when have they said we just don't want and or can't help and support refugees in the past, and what do y'all do in that situation?
Yes, sir. So I use the word collaborate a lot because it may not be in any federal or state mandate, but that's just how we do business in our community and at our agency. And so we work with county hospitals, city government, we work with our school districts, police, law enforcement, anyone you can think of, and invite everyone to come to a meeting on a quarterly basis. That's not just with Catholic Charities Fort Worth. We actually have 3 local refugee resettlement agencies in our area. So we don't have all these separate meetings. We all come together. We talk about the issues. We coordinate. We collaborate. We do whatever we can to make sure that there's not system breakdown. A few years ago, we had a specific group in our community who didn't really understand refugees and wanted to understand it more. So we brought folks from the state of Texas and from the national office to come to Fort Worth to teach and to educate and for us to problem solve a specific issue we were having with our refugee community. We believe in doing business as team.
Mayor, you said there was a Catholic Charities that does place in Amarillo.
Correct.
Your experience with the Catholic Charities placement, is it different than the gentleman on your right is regarding the coordination?
Let me disclose that the person that now is executive has been a friend of mine for 30 years. Okay, so I have taught Sunday school in a class with her 20 years ago for a period of time. But that relationship has only led me to find information about this that I think caused me concern. Catholic Charities made a determination because of pressure from the school system several years ago to cut their number in half. They were told by HHS that if they cut the number in half, they wouldn't get any funding for secondary resettlement the next year. And we all shook our head and said, what? So they were going to drop from about 500 to 250. RST had come into town a couple of years prior and said they would pick up all those people and fill that quota for the federal government. It was a little bit chaotic when the charities said, we're going to cut. And the federal government said, no, you aren't. The state said, you really can't. And they weren't really allowed to because the other agency picked up every one of those, and we didn't have any net number less. They were doing it to respond to the community. RST did it to respond to what the federal government was and what they had. But a net result for our city was we continue to have a very, very high rate. So
that coordination was interesting. You had it kind of like squeezing a balloon. You had it less on one side and more on the other.
There's the coordination, the lack of it. I was thrilled that they were considering the responsibility in the city of what the schools were telling them was really burdening them, and then
but in the end, it didn't make any difference.
Their cut was thwarted by another one responsibly saying, we will take them. I don't think on RST's part there was any underhanded, we're going to do it. I think it was just simply they responded to federal pressure to take that. But the net result for us was we continue to get a very high number.
Tell me, this goes to the point of how placement agencies are actually financed. How do you make your money? I know it's a charity, of course, but how do you actually pay your staff and organization and grow your organization? Is it by the number of placements?
So as an agency, we're a $27 million organization. Refugee resettlement's under $5 million of our business. 35% of our agency is funded by government. The rest is not, because we believe in a private sector solution to solving and eradicating poverty. The money we receive from government, a large part of it is for refugee resettlement, and it's based in two ways, which is a real disconnect, in my opinion, from the federal and state. So we receive from the feds money based on number of refugees we take. But the way the state does it is based on the 3-year average of refugees we've taken. So what happens, the fear oftentimes, I'm not saying it's justified, but the fear is often organizations take a certain number of clients every year, a certain number of refugees we're resettling, and if an organization goes down on that number, the state funding goes down because the state looks at the numbers we've just taken in when English classes and other supportive services often need to be provided for a little longer period of a time. So there's a disconnect between state and federal ways the dollars are allocated.
You spoke regarding self-sufficiency of the refugee population after settlement. I have data here of the years February 10, 2000 to February 10, 2016 from the Department of State, Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. Texas had 30,486 cases and 73,000 individuals. Then you look at the state's testimony today, page 15. The current average monthly caseload fiscal year 15 for Medicaid was 25,000, and for SNAP is 36,000. And so that's basically half of at least the individuals. I know you can have cross-migration, relocation issues that maybe distort that, but do you have any input as to why those actual monthly caseloads in Medicaid and SNAP are 50% or slightly less than the actual number of individual cases over all those years?
Right. So refugees usually, when they arrive, many get on Medicaid, but that process usually ends after an 8-month period of time. And so once a client does hit, all the time frames are not aligned, but once a client does hit a point of self-sufficiency, in Texas, you're not eligible for Medicaid anymore.
My understanding is if you're a legal resident, you're still eligible for Medicaid.
Not if you don't qualify for Medicaid.
If you qualify.
If your income is too much. That's why I'm saying we get so many to self-sufficiency, because we get them a job, their families get jobs, and then they don't qualify for government assistance anymore.
And you track that very closely, the self-sufficiency numbers and
we do.
Job placement rates and things like that.
All of that, and we report all of that to the state of Texas as well as our federal partners. Yes.
Well, I just have the hard data from the state regarding the average monthly caseload. Is the actual individuals that are signed up at that time for Medicaid and for SNAP for the fiscal year, and it's again, members 25,000 a month average for Medicaid and 36,000 for this population of refugees. And the state of Texas only had 73,000 actual cases between the year 2000 and 2016.
Right. And I can only speak to our data, not the state's. Is that number just including refugees?
The number of refugees is actually from the Department of State, U.S. Department of State, Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, Office of Admissions, Refugee Processing Center, refugee arrivals from February 10, 2016 to February 10, 2000 to February 10, 2016. It doesn't compute with your data, I guess.
Yeah, and again, I'd be more than happy to share more details of our data.
I'd love to have that data from your organization.
Absolutely, we can
Members?
provide that.
Sure.
I have one question. You heard the mayor's testimony regarding the impact on the Amarillo schools. You know, you have all those different nationalities and languages. What is the Fort Worth experience in your school district over there? How many languages, how many different nationalities, and what are you all doing about it?
So we've resettled a large variety of populations as well, which brings, definitely language issues, cultural issues, a whole variety of things. Fort Worth has been so great because years ago they established what they call an International Newcomers Academy, and that is for foreign-born folks for when they arrive here, that they go to the Newcomers Academy for usually a year, maybe up to 2 years, before they transition into mainstream schools. So what it does is it has teachers who are actually specialized in cultural adaptation, language issues, all of that sort of thing, before we get them into the mainstream Fort Worth ISD classroom. So that's been a huge gift to our community, and if that's something other districts want to consider, I'm sure Fort Worth would be happy to tour them.
So is that unique to your school district, where you have that academy for a year and then they transition over to the regular public schools or
So I
private
can't,
schools?
since I represent Diocese of Fort Worth, that's the only one I'm familiar with, but do you know if there's others?
We have a refugee youth program in Amarillo. Where we've gotten resources through our national partners to provide mentoring for students, refugee students in Amarillo that need a little extra help, and also to match them with local residents and to bring their parents into the schooling process as well. But as the mayor said, we fully support that the district in Amarillo should have more financial support and resources, and we very much would like to help pursue those.
All right, thank you.
Senator Perry, Senator Campbell.
Just so and I don't understand how, I know you guys get federal funding, $5 million you say, 600 refugees, so roughly about $8,300 a piece per refugee. How much of that 8,300 translates down to the actual community level for helping transition those refugees? I mean, do you give money to the school districts? Where is this money staying?
Where does it go? Great question. So first of all, a chunk of the money goes actually to the refugee. So when a refugee arrives in our country, obviously they don't go to, we don't greet them at DFW airport and then send them to work on day 2. We send them to work quick, but not that quick. And so what it does is it gives them a pot of money to be able to pay their down payment on an apartment, a few months of rent, and other necessities that they need to live with for 3 months while they work to search for a job. So a chunk of it goes there. And then money comes to us. So we have staff who serve these refugees, who counsel these refugees, who get these refugees jobs, who teach them English, who help their kids get acculturated and into the school system. So that money goes to the refugee or for us to operate our service.
The total federal dollar envisioned to help communities to get these guys integrated into our society stays at your organizational level. And then they leave that system effectively into the local community where the school districts are left with kids that don't speak English, with 9/11, all the issues we've heard today. So am I the only one that sees the obvious in the problem if the funding's not getting down to the local? And I would ask, I guess, if you weren't getting $8,300 as an organization, you probably wouldn't do this service. So it's just frustrating to me, and it's typical how unthought out these initiatives are and how they leave people holding the bag. But I can't imagine if you put up $2,000 for this person's lifestyle, and I'm sure you have arrangements made to transition into housing and those kind of things on the front end, that it takes $6,000 to process this individual to hand them over to the community so that they would be fully responsible for the cost of that individual.
Can I respond to a few things? First of all, we are an organization who says yes because we're called by the gospel. So we would do many types of services we do if we didn't have a pay or source, especially the government. I mean, like I said, 65% of our $27 million budget is not funded by government, and we want it that way, frankly. When it comes to the cost per client, the one thing we have to consider is the budget numbers that I gave you for how much annually we spend in refugee services, and the number of clients we serve in refugee services a year is not apples to apples. So annually as an organization, we serve close to 6,000 refugees on an annual basis. We resettle 600 a year, but most of our refugees don't learn perfect English in a year, so we allow them to stay in English classes for 5 years. A lot of our refugees, because federal government funding ends at that kind of point of minimum wage employment, we know we want people to do better. We want that accountant to get certified here. So we have other Catholic Charities programs that'll pay for them to go to community college and do things like that. So when I talk about the money we spend a year on the refugees we serve, that amount of money is not parallel to the 609 that we resettled.
Who determines your priorities of spending in that program? Is it your board or is it federal guidelines?
Yeah. So we don't take any money as an organization that we're not comfortable with, aligned with mission, vision, values, and all of that. And so there's a lot of stringent contract requirements that the feds and the state give us regarding refugee resettlement. We follow all of those, and then we do more because we're called to a higher standard than what oftentimes the government funding allows for.
May I add that from our investigation, neither of these agencies, nor I doubt any in the country, are getting rich. It's not a lucrative business.
No.
So many of them are giving their own dollars from charity raised. And to RST's point about trying to intersect with students' needs, they proposed in our city going out and seeking private funding to help augment education. It would take an ongoing effort, a yearly thing, and that's the part about federal is this ends. Those people are left. These people can't serve them at a certain point beyond what their heart allows them to do, but the city's left to deal with that. I don't think anyone's getting richer. I think it is a little bit self-perpetuating because they have to staff at a good level. I hope they do have good counselors. I hope they do have good job placement people. They have to pay those people to do that. We don't see that. We just see that it's an overburdening in our city to deal with the overwhelming problems with the...
And one of the reasons
the individuals bearing the biggest brunt of the costs are your citizens in Amarillo that are paying those school district taxes,
Correct.
City taxes and county taxes,
Correct.
paying for law enforcement. And you have a hospital district. I don't even know.
Well, and they're
But
yeah.
those costs are being borne.
And it goes
they're not
on
being
for...
borne by the federal government.
goes on
they're
for
not
20
being borne
years.
by the placement agencies. They are being
Excuse me,
borne by
Senator.
the
Yep.
people of Amarillo, Texas.
And it goes on for decades. Decades.
Decades, yeah.
And so in Fort Worth specifically, we have, compared to 10 years ago, grown the numbers of refugees we're taking, but also, which increases obviously the number of refugees Texans are getting. But do keep in mind, in our city, 65 new residents move to our city every day. So if you look at percentage of growth, refugees are far below the percentage of growth as what Fort Worth is experiencing. So please consider that. And also please consider, there was a wonderful paper back in 2014 that Speaker Ryan did where he assessed all 90-something federal government programs that are in some way, shape, or form addressing poverty and the return on investment and the collection of those. And he identified the Match Grant Refugee Program as one of the most effective federally funded programs regarding poverty eradication. So please know there's been folks, both right, left side of this issue, that believe firmly there are some economic benefits.
The poverty being eliminated is to those individuals that are part of the program, not to the current citizens of that state or the country, correct?
That's correct. Match Grant Program is for those who participate. That's right. And that's one of the most successfully funded out of poverty programs that we have in this country.
Senator Campbell?
Well, that was to my question is, why is the model not working for the domestic impoverished?
That's a great question, and we are working to solve that every day. One of the biggest reasons, in my opinion, and in Fort Worth, is that the social service industry, unfortunately, is a broken industry. It's been built over years of federal government funding.
Let me
Yes.
interrupt just real quick. There's a timeline for the refugees to get off of
Public assistance.
public assistance. So I'm just trying to make a clear separation here. You're 100% of the refugees get jobs?
96.
96%. So there's got to be something clearer with public assistance for the domestic, for the citizens, for Texans, versus those that are refugees.
Yeah, so
We can't seem to get those on public assistance off.
oh, well, okay,
Or
so
they
that's a
can't
great
get
question.
job
And I would
because the refugees are getting a job where a Texan may not. I'm just, because 96% of the refugees come off of public assistance and they get a job, right? But it's not the same looking at the domestic impoverished that y'all care for, correct?
yes.
Trying to see that difference.
Great, I'd be happy to explain it. Welfare programs, in many cases, are also time limited. TANF, other things like that, time limited. The way our welfare system is in Texas, in the United States, is not an effective system for pushing people out of poverty. So what we at Catholic Charities do, we get a family who walks through our doors and they're working, okay? And the economics of their situation, if we were just going sheerly on the economics, would be for us to tell them, quit your job and get on welfare programs, because you do not make enough in order to get by as a family. And so the main difference we see with domestic clients that we serve is minimum wage employment and what the federal government defines as the poverty line, and what it takes for actually a family in our community to get by. So a lot of the struggles we are having with domestic folks we are trying to move out of poverty is that gap and what it takes to get out of poverty, because you have to often leap out of poverty.
Let me interrupt.
Yes.
The refugees come here also as a family.
Yes.
They get a job.
Yes.
Better job then than the domestic impoverished, because they get a job still. Now it raises them above the poverty level.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying the domestic come in, they have a job, they're under the poverty level.
Mm-hmm.
So why would the refugees be getting a better job to get them off of public assistance, even early, you said, but our domestic impoverished do not?
That is a complicated question with a whole variety of answers, so I can try to hit on a few of those things.
That's I'm just, maybe if you can, if you don't mind, just maybe write some of that down and get it to our office.
Great,
Just
I'd be happy to do that.
take a look at it.
I would be happy to do that.
Senator Rodriguez,
The
you
companies
recognize?
pay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, that the companies over there pay $12.50 or something an hour. That's way above the federal minimum wage, so I can see
is,
those
yes.
families being more successful. So I guess that makes your point about the minimum wage and how that still leaves people in poverty.
It's that the people who come over as refugees, one of the other big things is only 0.5% come. So you're getting the refugees that they know can be successful in our country. And so there's a lot of reasons, and I'd be happy to share tons of information on that.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I would say.
Campbell, you recognize?
Thank you. It's just hard for me seeing when you're putting person to person, excuse me, no job, why refugees seem to have a success rate that our domestic impoverished do not. Do you get more dollars for refugees coming in that you don't get, additional dollars for the refugees that you do not get for domestic impoverished?
No, it really isn't
I mean, that's
about a
just a
funding
no.
model. No.
Thank you. Members, any other questions of this panel? Thank you all. Mayor, have a safe trip back to Amarillo.
Thank you.
Very much. Have a safe trip back up to Fort Worth. And
Thank you.
Safe trip home. We have members, 3 individuals.